At Thanksgiving dinner, my daughter-in-law introduced me to everyone as the unbearable mother-in-law. My son just stared at his plate and said nothing. It was the last time I sat in silent humiliation. I simply smiled, knowing my pumpkin pie would remain untouched. What she didn't know was that my pie was the last gift she would ever receive from me. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. The savory aroma of roasted turkey greeted me as I pulled into David and Rebecca's driveway. My heart thumped with that familiar mixture of anxiety and hope, the same uneasy anticipation I felt every time I came here. After 15 years of marriage, I still wondered if today would be any different. I smoothed down my navy blue dress, chosen carefully for the occasion, and drew in a deep breath. In my hands, I carried the homemade pumpkin pie I had spent hours preparing. It had always been David's favorite since he was a boy, a small gesture to feel connected to my only son, though lately that connection had become fragile, almost intangible. Before I could even reach for the doorbell, it swung open. David stood there with a smile, but there was a tension in his eyes I couldn't miss. "Hi, Mom," he said, giving me a brief, perfunctory hug. "Glad you could make it." "Thank you for inviting me, dear," I replied, careful not to let my disappointment slip in, aware that his words sounded rehearsed, as though he were fulfilling an obligation rather than welcoming me genuinely. I handed him the pie, and he scrutinized it with a polite but strained smile. "Rebecca already made dessert, but I'm sure we can serve both," he said. I knew that in reality, my pie would likely sit untouched in the kitchen, but I nodded and smiled anyway. At 63, a widow for 10 years, I had learned the quiet art of swallowing small indignities. The living room buzzed with activity. Rebecca's parents, her brother and his wife, a few friends I didn't know, and there were my grandchildren, 12-year-old Emma and 9-year-old Noah, each glued to their tablets in the corner. When Noah finally noticed me, he darted across the room and wrapped his small arms around me. The warmth of his hug, so unguarded and genuine, was the first authentic connection I had felt all evening. Rebecca appeared then, gliding from the kitchen in her flawless designer dress, her hair perfectly styled as always. Our eyes met briefly, and I saw the effort in her smile. It didn't reach her eyes. "Martha, you're here," she said, her tone polite but carrying a subtle edge, as if my presence had been an unexpected inconvenience despite the invitation she had sent weeks ago. "Thank you for having me, Rebecca," I said, offering the bottle of wine I had brought. "I hope you'll enjoy it." She examined the label as though I had committed a grievous offense. "Interesting. I'll save this for a special occasion," she said, her words translating clearly to, "This wine will never be opened." I tried to strike up a conversation with Emma, but she barely glanced up from her tablet. Over the past 2 years, I had noticed the subtle distance growing between my grandchildren and me, as if someone had been gently teaching them to keep me at arm's length. "Dinner's almost ready," Rebecca announced. "Why don't we all take our seats?" The table was impeccable, perfectly arranged. I couldn't deny her talent for creating visually flawless settings. I took my assigned seat at the far end of the table, distant from both David and the children. As everyone settled, Rebecca remained standing, wine glass in hand, preparing for what I immediately recognized as her signature performance. "Before we begin, I'd like to thank everyone for being here this Thanksgiving," she began, her voice smooth and measured. "It's wonderful to be surrounded by people we love." I offered a polite smile, trying to ignore the hollow emptiness of feeling invisible. "And for those meeting our family today," she continued, gesturing toward a couple I didn't recognize, "let me introduce everyone." She moved around the table, naming each guest with warm remarks. My lovely parents, John and Elaine, my brother Brian and his wonderful wife Melissa, our dear friends Mark and Susan. When she reached me, she paused deliberately. Her gaze shifted in a way that sent a chill down my spine. Then, with a thin, carefully controlled smile, she said, "And this is Martha, the unbearable mother-in-law." The room fell into a suffocating silence. I felt my blood drain from my face as all eyes turned toward me. Some looked embarrassed, others curious, waiting to see how I would react to this public humiliation. David cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Rebecca," he murmured, but offered no defense, no correction. He simply focused intently on his plate, as if it suddenly held the world's most fascinating details. At that moment, sitting exposed at the Thanksgiving table, a wave of years' worth of quiet exclusion and subtle cruelty crashed over me. It wasn't just the sting of this remark, it was the cumulative weight of forgotten invitations. Social media posts showing outings with my grandchildren that I hadn't been told about. Small cutting jokes disguised as humor, and countless overlooked occasions that had chipped away at my dignity. Sorry, it was just a joke, Rebecca said finally, laughing lightly, implying that my silence was an overreaction. Martha knows I adore her. I forced a mechanical smile, hiding the storm of emotions raging inside me, because that's what I had always done. I swallowed the pain, kept the peace. I didn't want to stir up trouble for David. Didn't want to be labeled the difficult mother-in-law Rebecca constantly claimed I was. Of course, I said, my voice firmer than I expected, almost surprising even me. Lovely as always, Rebecca. Dinner unfolded with the stilted rhythm of forced conversation. I ate sparingly, the knot in my throat made swallowing nearly impossible. I watched Rebecca orchestrate every interaction with practiced ease, noted how David seemed like a pale shadow of the confident man I had raised, and felt the ache of my grandchildren scarcely acknowledging my presence. As laughter and chatter carried on around me, a quiet certainty began to take root. The Martha who had once swallowed insults and accepted scraps of affection had died at that very table. A change was overdue. I had to reclaim my dignity. How exactly I would do it, I didn't yet know, but at that Thanksgiving table, silently humiliated in front of both strangers and family, I made a promise to myself. This would not stand. When the meal ended and I said goodbye with polite smiles and mechanical hugs, no one could have guessed the transformation that had begun within me. Rebecca had underestimated me for the last time. This unbearable mother-in-law was about to teach a lesson no one in that family would ever forget. The drive home from David's house blurred into one long stretch of darkness. Tears threatened, but I refused to give them the satisfaction of falling. 10 miles of black roads lay ahead as memories surged, each sharper than the last. It hadn't always been this way. When David first introduced me to Rebecca 18 years ago, she had been all charm and smiles. "I've heard so much about you, Mrs. Wilson," she had said, pulling me into a warm embrace. "David adores you." I remembered the hope that had filled me then. After losing Richard to cancer, David was all I had left of family. The idea of gaining a daughter through marriage had been exhilarating, almost miraculous. The change had been subtle at first, almost imperceptible. A casual criticism here, a pointed comment there. "Oh, is that what you're wearing to the restaurant?" she'd ask, honeyed voice masking critical eyes. "David mentioned you used to make meatloaf differently," she'd add. David had never complained about my cooking before, but the distance started to grow. Weekend visits turned into monthly ones, then only holidays. Phone calls shortened, and whenever I tried to reach David, he was always just heading out or caught up in something urgent. Pulling into my driveway, the modest house dark and quiet, I slumped onto the sofa without turning on a single light. Photos on the mantel chronicled a life that felt increasingly foreign. David's graduation, family vacations, Richard and me on our 30th anniversary. My favorite was the picture of Emma's birth, my newborn granddaughter cradled in my arms, David's arm around me, all of us beaming. Rebecca had been recovering in the hospital, but the camera had captured our joy perfectly. 2 weeks after that picture, the real trouble began. "Mom, Rebecca thinks it's best if you don't visit for a while. The baby needs routine," David had said, apologetic yet firm. When I was finally allowed back, Rebecca's mother was already ensconced in the guest room, helping indefinitely. Scrolling through David's social media, I saw the smiling family moments I had been excluded from. Trips to the zoo, the beach, holiday gatherings I hadn't been invited to. One photo, 3 months old, stabbed sharper than the rest. Family reunion weekend. Rebecca's entire extended family all together without a word to me. The worst came when Noah started school. I had offered to help with pickups, as any grandmother would, only to be brushed aside. "That's sweet, Martha," Rebecca said, "but we've got it covered. Besides, the kids have so many activities. It would be too complicated to explain to you." Too complicated? As if I couldn't grasp a simple schedule. As if I might somehow endanger my own grandchildren through sheer incompetence. I put down the phone and finally let myself cry, not just for the humiliation of that night, but for the years of systematic exclusion, the canceled plans, the forgotten invitations, the way Rebecca would talk over me or redirect every conversation when I tried to connect with David or the children. The painful truth, I had become invisible in my own family, a ghost tolerated rather than welcomed. I moved to my desk and pulled out a small leather journal, a repository of notes I had kept for years, though I had never fully admitted why. Dates of canceled visits with Rebecca's excuses, screenshots of family events discovered after the fact, brief accounts of her undermining almonds. It wasn't paranoia, patterns were laid bare on these pages. There was the time I brought homemade cookies for the children, only to have Rebecca toss them away when she thought I wasn't looking. Too much sugar, she claimed, before serving store-bought ones in their place. An hour later, the cupcakes sat untouched. I remembered last Christmas, when I had spent hours carefully picking out gifts for the children, only to have them left unopened until I had already gone home. And the family tree project Emma had made for school, Rebecca's family meticulously illustrated, while mine was reduced to a tiny circle labeled simply Grandma W. Through it all, David had changed. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the loving, attentive son I had raised had become a man I barely recognized. Distant, unable to meet my eyes when his wife insulted me at their dinner table. The clarity of that realization hit me like a physical blow. For years, I had been enabling this treatment. By smiling through the pain, by never confronting Rebecca's behavior, by silently accepting David's neglect, I had taught them both that I would endure anything just to maintain my fragile, tenuous place in their lives. My phone buzzed. A text from my friend Elaine. How's Thanksgiving? I stared at the screen. How could I possibly explain it? The weight of the afternoon, the humiliation, the ache in my chest, it felt impossible to put into words. But then I made a decision. I typed back, "Can we meet for coffee tomorrow? I need your advice." For the first time in years, I was done pretending. I wasn't going to silently accept my role as the unwanted mother-in-law anymore. That night, lying in bed staring at the ceiling, I realized something profound. The Martha who had walked away from that Thanksgiving table was not the same woman who had arrived hours earlier, carrying a homemade pumpkin pie and clinging to desperate hope for acceptance. Rebecca wanted an unbearable mother-in-law. Maybe it was time to show her exactly what that really meant. The next day, Elaine listened in disbelief as I recounted the scene. "She actually introduced you as the unbearable mother-in-law to everyone at the table?" Her voice rose, pulling curious glances from other patrons in the small cafe where we sat. I nodded, wrapping my hands tightly around my coffee mug. David just sat there, silent. Elaine had been my friend for over 30 years. We had taught at the same elementary school until retirement, supported each other through the deaths of our husbands, and shared countless conversations over coffee just like this one. Unlike me, she had a wonderful relationship with her daughter-in-law. "Martha," she said firmly, "this has gone beyond rudeness. This is emotional abuse. You've told me bits and pieces over the years, but hearing it all together with Shein, why have you tolerated it for so long?" Her question hung in the air as December snow began to drift lazily onto the sidewalks outside. I admitted the truth. Fear of losing David completely, fear of never seeing my grandchildren. "And how often do you see them now?" Elaine asked gently. The answer stung. Holidays sometimes, occasionally not even then. I had found out they went to Disney World last spring without a word to me. Emma had a dance recital I wasn't even told about. My voice caught. Noah lost his first tooth. I saw it only on Facebook. Elaine reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "So you're already losing them?" "Yes," I whispered. "Then what do you really have to lose by standing up for yourself?" "Nothing." The realization was both terrifying and liberating. Driving home, her words echoed in my mind. For years, I had believed that keeping the peace at any cost was the only way to hold on to my fragile connection to my family. But that strategy had failed, spectacularly. At home, I stood in front of the hallway mirror and really looked at myself for the first time in years. When had my posture become so hunched? When had I started dressing in these muted, inconspicuous colors? When had I begun seeing myself through Rebecca's dismissive eyes? The phone rang, jolting me. David's name flashed on the screen. "Mom," he said, his voice strained. "Rebecca wants me to call. She thinks you might have misunderstood her joke yesterday." "Not an apology, not even close." "Does she?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "You know how she is," he said, hesitating. "Her sense of humor can be different. Anyway, she feels bad if you took it the wrong way. Again, not an apology. The blame was placed squarely on me. In the past, I would have rushed to smooth things over, brushing it off. Oh, it's fine. Don't worry about it. The words almost spilled out automatically. Instead, I inhaled deeply. How should I have taken being called unbearable in front of your entire family and friends? David? Silence stretched between us. She didn't mean it like that, he said finally, defensive. How did she mean it? More silence. Mom, why are you making this difficult? It was just a joke. There it was. I was the problem. I was making things difficult simply by refusing to accept public humiliation with a smile. David, I said carefully, would you ever introduce Rebecca's mother that way? Would she find it funny if you did? That's different, he said quickly. Why? No answer. I let the silence stretch around me, heavy and unfamiliar. I continued, my voice barely above a whisper. Perhaps, maybe we should pause our usual Christmas arrangements this year. The words felt strange, even to me. Every year followed the same rhythm. I brought gifts on Christmas Eve, then returned the next day for dinner. It was predictable, rigid, a pattern I had come to accept without question. My contributions, the carefully chosen gifts, my presence, my help with the meal, were minimized, tolerated at best, often rearranged or outright replaced by Rebecca. What do you mean? David's voice sounded genuinely surprised, and that in itself was revealing. The very idea that I might draw a boundary, that I might assert my own needs had never crossed his mind. I think I need some time to myself this year, I said. The words tasted foreign on my tongue, yet they felt right somehow. But the kids are expecting you, he's pressed. It's tradition. Was it, though? I realized suddenly that a tradition implied something cherished, something held dear. But our Christmas arrangement had become a ritualized performance of family unity, leaving me lonelier than I would have been had I stayed home. I'm sure you will make it lovely for them, I said, steadying my voice. Give them my love. Mom, he began, but I cut him off gently. I need to go now, David. I'll call you after the holidays. I hung up before he could protest further. My hands were shaking, not from fear, not from anger, but from the unfamiliar thrill of speaking my truth without apologizing for it. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called Susan, my old colleague, inviting her to dinner. Then I sent an email to the local community center, inquiring about volunteer opportunities. I even pulled out my watercolor set, long neglected, and set it on the dining table, as if placing a small beacon of possibility in the center of my life. For too long, my world had contracted, revolving solely around David's family, waiting for invitations that rarely came, keeping my schedule perpetually open, shrinking myself in quiet hopes of inclusion. No more. Before bed, I sent a text to David. I've given a lot of thought to our conversation. I love you and the children deeply, but I can no longer accept being treated as an afterthought in your lives. When you're ready to discuss this honestly, I'm here. No response came, and yet that night I slept better than I had in years. The Martha who woke the next morning held herself a little straighter, felt a little stronger. The battle ahead would not be easy, I knew, but for the first time in decades, I understood that my dignity was worth fighting for, and I was only just beginning. Christmas came and went. No calls from David, only a terse text on Christmas morning. Merry Christmas, Mom. The brevity stung. The silence hurt, but it also revealed a truth I had long suspected. I had declined one invitation, set one boundary, and my son had retreated entirely. January arrived wrapped in a soft blanket of snow, and with it came a new sense of purpose. I began seeing Dr. Mitchell, a kind, thoughtful woman in her 50s who specialized in family dynamics. What you're describing, she said during our third session, is a classic control pattern. Your daughter-in-law feels threatened by your relationship with your son and grandchildren. She's systematically pushed you to the margins. But why? I asked, my voice trembling. I've never interfered in their marriage. I've bent over backward to accommodate her. That's precisely it, Dr. Mitchell said gently. The more you accommodate unreasonable behavior, the more it signals that the behavior is acceptable. You've been trying to prove your worth by being accommodating. But to someone like Rebecca, that's seen as weakness. The word stung. It cut sharply, but I could not deny it. I had seen it all along, in quiet moments, in subtle rejections, in the way my presence seemed never quite welcome. What can I do? I asked. I don't want to lose my son and grandchildren forever. You have to be prepared for things to get worse before they get better, Dr. Mitchell warned. When you change long-established patterns in relationships, resistance is normal. But the current pattern isn't working, Martha. You're being erased from your own family. February brought an unexpected moment of connection. Emma, my 12-year-old granddaughter, called one afternoon. Grandma? Her voice was tentative, careful. Are you mad at us? My chest tightened. Of course not, sweetheart. I could never be mad at you. Then why didn't you come for Christmas? Dad said you were busy, but you've never been busy before. The implication was unmistakable. David had framed my absence as my own choice, as though I had preferred other things over time with my family. I drew a deep breath. I needed some time to think, I said slowly, carefully. Sometimes grown-ups need space to figure things out. Oh. Her pause was filled with uncertainty. Mom says you're being dramatic. Of course she did. Emma's voice lowered to a whisper. Do you remember what Mom called you at Thanksgiving? The unbearable mother-in-law, I murmured, a chill running through me. She says stuff like that a lot when you're not around, Emma admitted quietly. The confirmation stung, a fresh pang of hurt. How did that make you feel when she said it? I asked gently. Bad, Emma admitted. Noah cried later. He said it was mean. My heart softened. At least one of them had recognized the cruelty for what it was. It hurt my feelings, I said honestly. And sometimes when people hurt our feelings, we need time to heal. Will you come see us soon, she asked. I got an A on my science project. I'd love to tell you all about it. Maybe we could meet for ice cream this weekend. And for the first time in a long while, I felt a sliver of hope. Just the two of us. After hanging up the phone, I immediately called David. As I had anticipated, it went straight to voicemail. I left a message. David, Emma called me. She wants to meet for ice cream this weekend. I'd like your permission to take her on Saturday afternoon. Please let me know. An hour later, his reply came. Fine, 2 p.m. 1 hour with my granddaughter. Granted, it read, like a reluctant favor. Still, it was something. A tiny acknowledgement, but meaningful all the same. That Saturday, Emma and I sat across from each other at the ice cream parlor. I made a conscious effort not to speak ill of Rebecca or pry into Emma's life at home. Instead, I simply listened as she animatedly described her science project on ecosystems. Mom didn't help at all, she said, pride shining in her eyes. She added that her mom thought it was too messy. Well, I think it sounds wonderful, I said, remembering how much I had loved science projects when I was teaching. Emma's eyes widened in surprise. You were a teacher? Mom said you just stayed home. Another lie, another distortion of the truth. I smiled softly, correcting her. I taught elementary school for 30 years. 3rd grade. Your dad used to come by my classroom after school. He'd help feed the class guinea pigs. Emma giggled. Dad was scared of our hamster. He made Mom clean the cage. These small glimpses into their lives. The real ones, messy and imperfect, not the polished images shown online, were precious. They were pieces of my children and grandchildren I hadn't been allowed to see regularly. As our hour drew to a close, Emma asked softly, Can we do this again, Grandma? I'd like that very much, I said, hugging her tightly. Goodbye. Outside, David waited in the parking lot, glancing at his watch. He gave a curt nod as Emma bounded to him, chattering excitedly about our time together. Emma, get in the car, please, he said, his voice tight. Once she was inside, he turned to me. Mom, what are you doing? Having ice cream with my granddaughter? I met his gaze evenly. You know what I mean, I said quietly. This sudden boundary setting, the skipped Christmas, these one-on-one visits, Rebecca saw them as my attempt to wedge into our family. But I had no such intention. I told him calmly, I'm doing the opposite, David. I'm trying to preserve my relationship with my family in a way that maintains my dignity. Declining that invitation at Christmas was my choice. I didn't reject you. I simply refused one invitation after being publicly humiliated at the previous gathering. He looked away. She apologized for that. No, I corrected firmly. She didn't apologize. She said I misunderstood. That's not an apology. David ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I remembered from his frustrated teenage years. What do you want from me, Mom? He asked, honestly, for the first time in years. I want to be treated with respect, I said. I want to be included in my grandchildren's lives. I want you to stop letting your wife belittle me. His jaw tightened. You don't understand what it's like living with Rebecca. I finished the thought for him. You're right, I don't. But I do understand what it's like to be systematically pushed out of my son's life. and I won't accept it anymore. Driving home afterward, a realization settled in my mind. This wasn't just about standing up to Rebecca. It was about helping David see what had happened to our relationship and to him. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was fighting for something real, not just enduring. March brought unexpected shifts. After that ice cream outing with Emma, little messages began trickling in. Updates about school, questions about recipes, photos of art projects. Each one was a tiny bridge being rebuilt between us. For Noah's birthday in late March, I carefully chose a gift, a model rocket kit we could assemble together someday if he was ever allowed to visit. There was no acknowledgement from David or Rebecca, but Emma sent me a furtive photo of Noah holding the unwrapped gift, beaming. "He loves it," her text said. "Mom said it was too complicated, but Dad said they'd work on it." A small victory. David had contradicted Rebecca for once. My weekly sessions with Dr. Mitchell continued. "You're making progress," she told me. "Remember, your goal isn't to win against Rebecca. It's to establish healthy boundaries and rebuild genuine connections." I nodded, though a tiny, mischievous part of me still fantasized about Rebecca finally getting her comeuppance. Dr. Mitchell seemed to read my mind. "Martha, vindication might feel good for a moment, but it won't heal your family. Focus on the relationships you want to restore." April arrived, bringing a surprise invitation. Easter dinner at David and Rebecca's. I approached it cautiously, using the emotional preparation techniques Dr. Mitchell had taught me. When I arrived, something felt different. David greeted me with a warmer hug than usual. The children rushed to me, Noah eagerly telling me about the rocket we would build together soon. Rebecca, though civil, kept her usual barbed comments notably absent. During dinner, I noticed another shift. David's eyes were on Rebecca, observing her interactions with the children in a way that seemed almost analytical, like he was finally paying attention. Me, twice when she started dropping those subtle jabs. I caught them both times, but I redirected the conversation before it could turn tense. Something had shifted in the air, though. After dessert, while Rebecca was busy in the kitchen, David asked the kids to show me their new backyard playset. As we stepped outside, he leaned in, lowering his voice. "Mom, can we talk later this week, just the two of us?" My heart jumped. "Of course," I replied, barely containing the sudden surge of hope. 3 days later, we met at a small, quiet cafe halfway between our homes. David looked drained. The dark circles under his eyes seemed heavier than usual. He picked at his coffee, staring into the phone before finally speaking. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "A big one. I waited because I didn't trust myself to say the right words. After Thanksgiving, and then Christmas, I was angry with you." I listened, silently bracing for what was coming. "I thought you were being difficult," he continued, voice tight. "But then I started really paying attention. Really paying attention." When he finally looked up, his eyes were troubled, haunted. "I noticed how Rebecca talks about you when you're not around. How she tells the kids you're too busy to see them. When I know she's canceled plans with you. How she rearranges your gifts or forgets to tell me when you've called. Validation after years of gaslighting pressed against my chest, and tears welled up unbidden. And last week," his voice dipped even lower, "I found emails between her and her mother. They were mocking you, planning ways to keep you from Emma's upcoming recital. It was cruel, Mom, deliberately cruel." "I've known for years, David," I said gently, feeling both sorrow and a quiet satisfaction. He winced at my words. "Why didn't you say something?" I asked. "I tried so many times, but you didn't want to hear it. You always defended her." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration mixing with shame. "I didn't want to see it. It was easier to believe you were overreacting than to admit I'd let this happen." "When did it start?" I asked, my voice almost trembling. "Almost immediately after you were married," I admitted. "Small things at first. Then after Emma was born, it escalated." David's face fell. 15 years, I let this go on for 15 years. "You were caught in the middle," I said softly, though a part of me wanted him to feel the full weight of the failure to protect our relationship. "No," he said firmly. "I chose the easy path. I chose to believe what was convenient." The raw honesty startled me. This was a different David than the conflict-avoidant man I'd known over the past years. "What changed?" I asked. "You did," he said simply. "When you stopped accepting the treatment, when you started setting boundaries, it made me see what was happening. Then Emma came home from your ice cream date, talking about what a great teacher you were, and Rebecca snapped at her, saying you were exaggerating. Something clicked. I realized I didn't even recognize my own life anymore. I reached across the table and took his hand. What are you going to do? He squeezed my hand, firm and determined. I've started therapy alone, not couples counseling. I need to figure out how I let this happen, how I became someone who would let his mother be treated this way. I've told Rebecca things need to change. I could imagine her reaction. She had controlled the narrative for so long. The kids miss you, he continued, voice catching. I miss you. I want you back in our lives. Really, fully in our lives. I want that too, I admitted. But I knew I couldn't go back to how things were. I know, I don't expect you to, He hesitated. I need time to fix this, to fix myself. When we parted, David hugged me tightly. I'm sorry, Mom, I'm so sorry. Driving home, a storm of emotions churned inside me. Hope, vindication, lingering hurt, and an acute concern for my son, trapped in what would inevitably be a painful marital reckoning. I had longed for David to see the truth, but now that he had, the way forward remained uncertain. Rebecca would not relinquish control easily, and the confrontation I had avoided for years might finally be unavoidable. But for the first time, I realized I would not face it alone. The weeks after our conversation were turbulent. Rebecca stopped responding to my texts about the children. David would try to arrange visits, only to call apologetically to reschedule. Something was shifting in their household, a silent battle I could feel radiating outward, though I was not a participant. Give it time, Dr. Mitchell advised during our sessions. Family systems resist change. You've disrupted a long-established pattern. Then, in late May, an envelope arrived. Emma's spring piano recital. The cream-colored stationery bore David's handwriting, a tentative olive branch. I spent extra time preparing for the event, selecting an elegant blue dress I hadn't worn in years. As I applied a touch of lipstick, I studied my reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back stood taller, her eyes clearer and more resolute than they had been in years. The school auditorium was already filling when I arrived. I spotted David saving a seat near the front. Rebecca was nowhere to be seen. She has a migraine, he whispered as I sat down beside him. Relief softened his expression. Noah's with his sister for the evening. Part of me exhaled, tension easing, though I knew the journey was far from over. I felt a pang of guilt mixed with relief, a strange contradiction twisting inside me. I didn't wish any harm on Rebecca, yet her absence brought an unexpected reprieve from the constant tension that seemed to hover whenever she was around. Emma's nervous, David said quietly. She'll be so glad you came. When Emma stepped onto the stage, her eyes darted across the audience, wide and searching, a flicker of anxiety shadowing her small face. Then she saw us, and in an instant, that anxiety melted. Her expression brightened, and she radiated a quiet determination. When her fingers touched the piano keys, she played with a confidence I hadn't seen before, each note precise, each movement flowing effortlessly, as though she had been born to perform. After the recital, we waited in the lobby, the echoes of her music still lingering in the air. A woman approached, her posture warm and welcoming. Emma's piano teacher, Miss Chen, smiled at David first. Mr. Wilson, she greeted warmly, then turned to me, her eyes softening. And you must be Martha. Emma talks about you all the time. I blinked, taken aback. She does? Oh yes, Miss Chen continued, oblivious to the slight confusion twisting inside me. She tells me you were a teacher and that you've been helping her with her technique. The exercises you suggested for her hand positioning have made such a difference. I glanced at David, perplexed. I hadn't given Emma any piano lessons. Ms. Chen carried on, her voice cheerful, completely unaware of my inner bewilderment. And thank you for the music books you sent. Those classical adaptations are perfect for her level. David's face darkened. What music books? The ones Emma brought in last month, Ms. Chen asked hesitantly, her smile faltering. She said they were from her grandmother. At that moment, Emma bounded toward us, her small body glowing with post-performance excitement. David crouched to hug her, his tone careful, measured. You were amazing, sweetheart. Ms. Chen nodded at Emma. I was just telling them about some music books Grandma sent you. Emma froze, her eyes flicking back and forth between us. I said gently, placing a calming hand on her shoulder. I think there's been some confusion. I didn't send you any music books. Her face crumpled instantly. I'm sorry. Mom said I couldn't take lessons anymore because They were too expensive. But I love piano so much, I told Ms. Chen that the books were from you and that you were helping me. David's jaw tightened. Your mother said we couldn't afford lessons? Emma nodded miserably, her voice barely audible. We'll talk about this at home, David said, his voice tight with controlled frustration. Say goodbye to Grandma and Miss Chen for now. As Emma hugged me, she whispered, her small voice trembling. I'm sorry, Grandma. You have nothing to be sorry for, I reassured her, stroking her hair gently. I'm so proud of you. Driving home, my mind raced. Rebecca had lied to Emma about the lessons being too expensive. But why? Was it simply another way to control the narrative in her favor? Or was there something deeper, something more deliberate at play? The truth surfaced 3 days later. David called, his voice tired but firm, carrying a weight of resolve. Mom, there's something you need to know. Rebecca's been mismanaging our finances. What do you mean? I asked, already sensing the answer. He sighed a long, heavy exhale that spoke of frustration bottled up for too long. She told Emma we couldn't afford piano lessons, but that same month she spent thousands on a spa weekend with her friends. And it's not a one-time thing. She restricts spending on things that matter to me or the kids while indulging herself. I listened, stunned but not entirely shocked. Control rarely confines itself to a single aspect of life. It seeps into everything. There's more, David continued, his voice steadier now, though edged with pain. Remember those college funds we started for the kids when they were born? The ones you contributed to each year? My stomach sank. Yes, he said quietly. Half of that money is gone. Rebecca moved it into a personal account. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Years of careful savings, money from my teacher's pension, meant to give my grandchildren a head start in life. Squandered. David, I'm so sorry, I whispered, my voice cracking. Don't apologize, he said firmly. I'm the one who should have been paying attention. But I will fix this, Mom, all of it. 2 weeks later, David asked if the kids could stay with me for a weekend. Rebecca and I need to have some serious conversations. Without the kids around, he explained. Those 3 days with Emma and Noah were precious beyond words. We baked cookies together, built a cardboard rocket that reached impossibly high into our imaginations, played board games until laughter filled every corner of the house. And most importantly, we talked, really talked, about school, friends, dreams, and everything in between. No one was there to cut our conversation short, no one to monitor our every word. When David came to pick them up, he looked different, lighter somehow, as though the weight of a long, difficult weekend had shifted just enough to ease his burden. Rebecca's moving out for a while, he said quietly as the children gathered their things. We're going to try counseling, but I've made it clear things have to change permanently. I nodded, understanding all he didn't